one of the things about doing this work, doing the book, I wanted it to be beautiful because I wanted you to see beauty in the art, because that leads you to the beauty in the person.
Mm,
And that's really what I was striving for. And I can see that behind me, you see Nevaeh,
yeah.
the young lady, the little girl I was with yesterday. And I've watched her grow over the last 2.5 years. And a wonderful young lady who's still living in the car. But you look at that picture, I look at that picture, and I'm touched by its beauty. I don't mean what I did, but who she is. I'm touched by that.
Hello and welcome to At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a multimedia platform where story by story, we explore the resiliency of the human spirit with people who are using their own personal journeys to leave a positive and transformative imprint on our world today. At the Podium holds a space for meaningful conversation, inspiration, and life. Today, I'm thrilled to share the podium with Kim Watson. Kim Watson has photographed, directed, and written for Grammy winners, Hollywood studios, and various entertainment platforms, including Disney, Nickelodeon, PBS, Warner Brothers, and many more. His work with groundbreaking hip hop artists garnered both MTV and Soul Train Awards for Best Music Video, as well as the NAACP recognition for his positive portrayals of African Americans. Untethered by labels, Kim has always aspired to tell a story that moves us to see the world a little bit differently and with more empathy. He lives in Los Angeles. Kim, welcome to At the Podium.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It is a real pleasure to sit down with you today. I want to say over the past 2 days, I've been reading your book, Trespass, which you describe here on the cover. You describe it as portraits of unhoused life, love, and understanding. And I would tell you, in reading this book, I really felt come through the pages and the images and what you wrote. I really felt the love that you had and that you have for these people who have found themselves in extraordinary circumstances. And I felt that my understanding went up a little bit more about what's really going on out there on the streets for people. And I want to start with this quote that you wrote about a jazz musician named Dadisi. Am I saying that right?
Wow, the DC, Komolafe.
Dadisi. Flute player, top of the jazz scene here in LA for many years, who found himself on the street. And I love this quote that you wrote about him because it ties back to something in your bio where you said that you want to inspire people to see the world a little bit differently and with a little bit more empathy. So you said the DC, you wrote of him, you said, we think we know who someone is by what we see in front of us, but we merely witness a small moment of their journey. Someone's past is not their present, nor must it define their tomorrow. To know someone, we must know who they were as much as who they are, and always leave space for hope and possibility. I felt that was really the thesis of your book because you really gave us a three-dimensional view of the people that we probably don't want to look at when we
Mhm.
are walking down the street. And the optimist in me really wants to believe there is hope for those
Mm.
people and for those situations. But you talk about how the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority says that we have 70,000 people as of 2022 living on the streets here in California and Los Angeles. And is that hope possible for the people living on the streets today?
First, thank you for reading that passage. It's interesting to hear it read back to me, and I appreciate that. That is an important passage. First, losses count is an undercount
Wow.
by, I'm sure, thousands, and it has escalated far beyond that by now. from when the book went to print. That said, I think that it's a mixed bag when we talk about hope and optimism and what they're feeling on the street. I think there's often a sense of despair
Mhm.
within those that live on the street. I mean, daily they're dealing with these complex situations that arrive, whether it's where to sleep safely, where to find a meal, where to go to the bathroom. So it can be hard to find that shining light. But I think that part of what I hope I'm able to do is provide a little bit of consistency in their lives. Someone who can show up on a regular basis just to say, "Hey, what's happening? I love you, and how are you?" The DC is a great example. He's an example of somebody who's always had hope,
Mhm.
and it goes between great hope and great despair. Somehow he's managed, despite his ups and downs over the years, to come out, and he just gets charged up again, ready
Mhm.
for the next next phase of what's coming at him. And he is probably the closest person to me. I see Al, I see a number of people. I was with a family that lives in the car, Nevaeh and her mom and dad that you saw in the book. I was with them yesterday, and I've known them for, I think it must be over 2 years now. And they've gone from living in a car to getting a motel room to being on the street at Christmas to back to a motel, back to a car. And that instability makes it hard to find that shining light at the end of the tunnel sometimes.
Mhm.
So, I know that answer was a little bit all over the place, but I'm hoping that there are people coming around that offer some hope to our friends on the street. But I know that's a big ask.
Yeah, and I don't think the answer is a clean answer. I think if it was a clean answer, we wouldn't have the issues that we have. So I think the struggle we're having in discussing hope is the struggle that we're having as a society in dealing with how do we address people
Right.
who have fallen through the cracks of all of our safety nets and end up on the streets. I think what's unique about your story and what you're doing is that you're an artist, you're a painter, you have directed videos, you've been recognized for the work that you do. And I'm wondering how you got involved in this work with the homeless and unhoused. And because in some cases in the book, you're interceding on people's behalf. You're trying to get that poor woman out of that that trailer, out of that
Mm.
RV before it actually burns down and kills her. How'd you find the passion for that? And then once you were involved to the level that you were involved, were you getting any kind of assistance from social workers or people in that space to give you guidance? Or was this more of a heart-led mission for you?
It started out just a heartfelt mission. And I'm from New York, where we live in such close proximity to each other.
Yeah.
It's not unusual to pass the homeless along the street. And growing up, that was the case. It was nothing like it is now. But coming up in New York, I mean, when I was in college, I was on the subway when my best friend from high school walked onto the train and was homeless. And I turned to the woman next to me who was a grandmother type, and I just looked at her and I was tearful. And and I said, "That's my best friend."
Mm,
And she said, "It's all right. It's all right, baby. You know grandmothers." So she tried to comfort me in that moment. But there was my best friend on the subway, panhandling.
mm,
And we hugged and spoke and went our separate ways. He ended up getting his life together and was blessed and went on to a very fruitful, positive life. But being in that close proximity gave me a sensitivity to that situation. So moving out here 100 years ago,
mm,
uh, and seeing this right in my neighborhood, seeing an RV pull up across from my house and stay there for a week and talking to them and seeing different folks close by where I lived. And then beyond, just had my heart open to it. and
Mm,
he'd always taken food, etc. And so I was familiar. I wasn't scared. And stepping into that world as I did so, resources started to come. Two things happened. I realized many of these folks couldn't navigate the system. I could barely navigate the system.
right.
And I knew they did not have the wherewithal to do that. And I felt compelled to reach out to the losses of the world and, the different organizations. And more often than not, it led nowhere. But there were a couple of people that were pivotal. Melissa Chavez, who was an executive director of CHPLA and now has her own nonprofit, Art, which I support. And then 211 LA, whose executive director, Maribel Manis was just amazing. And these two women, two brilliant women and committed women, really led me to understand how to work the system. And they took it upon themselves to be my go-to people.
Mm,
And I would call upon them and they would provide a caseworker. They knew how to work it. And they would provide this, that housing, a voucher
yeah.
for a hotel, in the rain. And I mean, amazing. So I was really fortunate to find partners like that. And I
Mhm.
consider them partners.
And I'm sure they consider you partners because I think as I was reading the book, my mind immediately went to this space of, well, where's the degree? Where's the backup? Where are all of the things that you have to have to do this? And then it occurred to me, I was looking at this picture because the picture is just haunting, right? The picture. And I can't
Yeah.
remember his name. I know you featured,
Gardner,
yes,
Gardner.
you featured
Yeah.
him in the book. But I was like, the work that Kim is doing is the work of the Good Samaritan. And that
Mm,
sometimes we wait for the degrees and we wait for the right moment to step in and help people. But the moment it really is now, is in that moment. And in the book, you're bringing people food and you're hunting them down to make sure they're okay and demonstrating to them that you actually really care about them as people. And I thought that was a really powerful message because I think many of us feel our hands are tied because we're not specialists in a particular area or we don't have the right degree or we don't have the right contacts.
yeah.
But you were like, no, just start. because because honestly in the book, and I mean this in no disrespect to people who work within the system of trying to support the efforts to help homeless people in
Mhm.
LA, the system does not fare well in the book because you see, and I can't recall her name right now, but she was the woman who was living in the RV. She had the oxygen tank and you were stopping by and you were visiting with her, and eventually the RV burns down and she dies inside of it and all that's left is her cat.
Mhm.
And the whole time, social services had her address and never stepped in to help. And I don't say that in any way to negate the work that social services does, but in her mind, you were social services, and I think that's a message to us all.
That's Crystal, and she she was a really special lady. She's tough as hell. She was a really tough lady, but we hit it off, and I was on my way to see her when and she's not far from my neighborhood, from my house. She was living on Washington Boulevard, and I was on my way there when I saw the fire engines, and was just praying that it wasn't something to do with her RV. And you know, folks like that, she actually asked me, "Why do you do this?" And I knew I had to come correct because she could see through BS and
Yeah,
she was not going to tolerate that. And I had to think about it because sometimes we do things from our heart and without giving it much thought, which was probably how I ended up doing this.
right.
I just jumped into it because I was heartfelt to do so. And she asked, "Why do you do this?" And I told her that I grew up with a lot of love, surrounded by love, which enabled me to be the artist that I am and to have the encouragement I had um, to overcome any of the artistic challenges we all encounter. And I just said, when I see someone that's missing that, I want to give them some of what I got.
Mm,
And she just sat back in her wheelchair and we talked about this. And the thing that she said that really struck me, she said, I grew up with a lot of abuse, and that's what I saw.
mm.
And I think that's one thing that I hope comes through in the book. There is so much trauma in each of these lives. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of trauma in the world today.
Right.
A lot of challenges that were not our parents' generation. You know what I mean? Where they could clearly see a path forward. And I think it's a lot more challenging now um, to make a good life.
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll change.
And you call out in the book, I mean, you draw a direct parallel between mental health, abuse, and drug addiction as a sort of unholy trinity that really sends people to living out on the streets or being or finding themselves unhoused. And I wonder, in your work, did solutions in your mind ever arise when we're talking about addiction, mental conditions, abuse? Did something spark in your mind that if we just did this, if we just had this in place, we could combat some of these pipelines to the street for people?
And I want to point to one other factor, the number one factor,
Mm.
driving people to the street now. And this is indicative of what I said about new things that we're contending with. And it's economic catastrophe and rents that no one can afford. That's the number one factor.
You call that out in the book, actually. You talk about,
I'm so glad I did.
yeah, you call that out.
Yeah, because I mean, it was a surprise to me. I did think that number one was going to be mental health or drug addiction, and I was corrected. And I have a friend, Dr. Ricky Bluthenthal, who's a friend for 25 years, and he is a powerful man in that world of addiction. And he kind of educated me to a lot of our treatment methodologies and things like that, successful and unsuccessful. I think that the main thing that I learned was that trinity, and the pipeline to the street, as I call it. The main thing that I was impressed with is the fact that if we do not find a way to shut off these things with education, with support and all of these, it's not going to shut down, which is why we have more folk on the street now than we had 2 years ago, despite Karen Bass's best efforts. And I don't want to negate what she's trying to do.
Yeah.
And when you speak of the number or a principal way to address the issue, I think that support. We can remove people from the street. We can put them in an apartment. And I've seen this, folks go to lovely apartments and then they're left there.
Yeah.
No one's coming to see them. They may not have the ability to socialize and go next door and or see a neighbor at the store and say hi and figure this out, a new friend.
Mm.
And it's the supports that I think are badly, badly lacking for me. That's kind of my pet peeve. We need more people, and I'm sure these folk that are giving their lives to trying to help are underpaid and overworked. So I did see at one point, it actually was with Melissa Chavez, and where they were bringing in folk that had worked on the street. Well, they came to work on the street once they got them off the street and
Yeah.
got them some help. So they hired those that had been homeless and started to get them engaged, because who could speak to the homeless better than them?
Yeah.
And I thought that was a wonderful thing, but I don't see much of that. I haven't encountered a lot of that.
Well, because I think a lot of us, and I can't speak for the world, but a lot of people are waiting for someone else to do something, and we are the someone else's, right?
Mm.
And I'll write the check, but we need that touch beyond the check. We need that engagement beyond, the grant that's written. We need that human to human connection. I think there's a gentleman in the book who you write about, Carlos. His story really moved me because he was like, I used to make fun of homeless people, and basically I lost my job and now I'm homeless. And I think that's what's so frightening to people, is that many people are much closer to that street than we want to admit. And
Step away.
what drove me to that, I was So, we live in Los Angeles. So I was driving down Beverly over by CBS where they used to shoot All in the Family. They shoot The Young and the Restless there. And there was two things. When there was an encampment on that sidewalk, and I was driving by and I was like, oh, that's not going to be there very long. They're not going to have these homeless people in front of the studio. The city will not allow that. And within a week, it was cleared out,
Mhm.
totally cleared out. But the thing that really struck me, I was driving down Beverly, I'm driving down, there's CBS, and across from CBS, there is a bus stop, just a little bus stop
Yes,
bench.
I know that bus stop,
Yes,
yes.
right? And there was a woman standing there, and her
Mhm.
back was to the street, so you could see the back of her, and you could see that her belongings were in bags on the bench. And
Mhm.
she was standing there, and she was interacting with the bags, but in such a way that in a moment I flashed in my mind. I said, I feel like I'm watching a woman standing in her kitchen, cleaning her dishes out of sink
Mhm.
and thinking about what she's going to do for that day. Her being on the street had become so normalized for her. And so she was able to have almost a private moment in public. And I remember thinking, it broke my heart. But even more than that, it made me think we had no idea during COVID how many people were just on the edge of not making it. And then when COVID happened and everything fell apart, the amount of people living on the streets was overwhelming in Los Angeles and in San Francisco. And somehow, and of course, I don't know the woman's story, but looking at her in that moment and thinking she's probably one of the people that just got fell through over the
Mhm.
last 4 years. It made me think, what kind of social responsibilities, what kind of social action do we need to take to help those people gain even a small percentage back of what their lives may have been like before COVID or before the economic catastrophe happened or the divorce happened or whatever
Yes.
the
Yeah.
mitigating factor is.
Well, you bring up COVID, and I think we can't underestimate the impact of that, because you're right. I mean, so many folk lost their jobs, and as a result of that, could no longer maintain an apartment. Families were falling apart. If you lose someone, and lots of folks were lost
Yeah.
uh, through their passing due to COVID, you're losing income. You're losing people that help sustain a home, a household, a family. Big impact. I think we're still feeling that impact
Mm,
with from COVID, and it will be a while before we recover.
mm. So I want to know how the book started and why you chose the book as a means of highlighting it. Because, and again, I was so conflicted reading it because some of the images were so beautiful that you shot.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I was like, I don't want to feel like I'm enjoying the artistry because the subject is so, and it's not
Mhm.
fiction. That's the problem. It's not fiction, it's real. So, you know, when you're talking to the DC and you're talking to Don, who wanted to have everything on his being perfectly ironed and the hat, those are real
Yeah.
people, but not characters in a movie. And so I had complex feelings enjoying just the artistry of your work tied to the subject. So I wonder for you how the book began and why the book in the form that it's in.
You know, and you may have to remind me of the first question, because I want to jump to the artistry part of that
And
and
we'll go
your
back to that.
response to
Yes.
that. Yeah, yeah. So, because I think that's important. And yes, I am an artist. So there's an aesthetic that I adhere to and that I strive for in all my work, right? There's art is beautiful, even when it depicts ugliness and strife. And one of the things about doing this work, doing the book, um, I wanted it to be beautiful because I wanted you to see and have these emotions, but I wanted you to see the beauty in the art, because that leads you to the beauty in the person.
Mm,
And that's really what I was striving for. And I thank you for acknowledging that conflict. That's very honest and it's real. So that's the art part of it. I can see that behind me. You see Nevaeh,
yeah.
the young lady, the little girl I was with yesterday, and I've watched her grow over the last 2.5 years, and a wonderful young lady who's still living in the car. But you look at that picture, I look at that picture, and I'm touched by its beauty. I don't mean what I did, but who she is. I'm touched by that. I'm touched by Al and Gardner, who you showed on the cover of the book, who, looks like my uncle to me. And so there are all these touchstones. And, when I talk to Nevaeh or talk to her parents, Nevaeh reminds me of one of my nieces.
Mm,
There are these things that connect on a very personal level that make me realize we're not that far apart. We have
mm,
a shared humanity. We have a shared humanity. We have a desire to connect and to love.
mhm.
And that's really been the thread I've tried to put through the book is love. And we're not that different. We're
No,
really not.
no.
Now, the first question I think I remember is how'd the book come about?
Yes. How did it even
I did
occur
it.
to you to like do that?
My brother, it did not occur to me.
Mm,
It occurred to someone else. And I had been shooting and writing very much for myself, and then I started to post it to share with friends on Instagram. And I would write and post and write and post, and my friends would, respond, and we'd talk about it when we'd get together. And many of them had done their share of volunteering and different things. So there was that in common.
yeah.
But I got a call one day from a wonderful woman, Liz Nealand, who had been an executive at a couple of the Hollywood studio and television entities and had been my executive on a couple projects that
Mhm.
I had written for with and she was the boss. She was my boss.
Yep.
And we always had a wonderful relationship. I always loved her and thought she was bright, bright lady and with a great heart. And she called me out of the blue and said, I've been following you. And I think there is a book here. What do you think? And it was the furthest thing from my mind. It really was. And I said, well, let's talk through that, you know?
Mm,
And the book came about. So she had retired, become a literary, well, not just an agent, she started a literary company in New York.
yeah.
And here she was calling me, and which seemed like some kind of divine intervention. And I was very grateful for the opportunity. And we went out to 5 companies and broadly snatched it up, thankfully, and there we are.
How did your subjects feel about being involved in the process of the photography and the storytelling that you have to do to bring their
I'm
stories to life?
I'm gonna start that answer with I've only been turned down once to shoot somebody. I pay people, not much. I mean, it's not like I'm handing out $100 bills, but many of these folks I've known over the course of years or would see consistently once, twice a week as I took food or clothing out. So there was a trust and a bond that was established, and their response was overwhelmingly positive. They wanted to go on record, so to speak. They wanted to be heard,
Mm,
they wanted to be seen. And this gave them an opportunity to be seen and heard with someone I think they trusted. And I take that very seriously. And have tried to honor that through the kinds of work and how they're portrayed, even these difficult scenes. I try to do with a level of empathy and love and artistic credibility and integrity.
I think you achieved it all. You know, it's a beautiful book. It's a complicated book. It's a complicated subject. One of the things that I found incredibly, I had just sort of like a visceral response to was the story of Alicia, who was the woman who has the physical disabilities. She's pregnant. She's a meth addict. And what's really great about the book is, the stories are not long, but they're
Mhm.
incredibly precise. So, and you were able to draw the character of these people very quickly, so you understand who the person is that you're writing about. And the thing that I found very moving about Alicia's story was that she understood that the baby was not thriving inside of her. She had an
Mhm.
awareness of that. And then you say the last time you saw her that she was with a bunch of people who she probably shouldn't have been with, and you remark that the baby bump was gone. I had to put the book down at that point. because it was just so real. And like to me, that's when like I mean, that and crystal burning in the car really just brought the RV, I'm sorry, really brought it
Yeah.
home.
Yeah, I mean that it was very interesting, that my encounter with her, and I ran into her about 6 weeks ago out of nowhere. I had not seen her in over since that last sighting. She told me that because it's a delicate subject, the
Right.
baby. She told me that the baby was born, lived. I was shocked.
The
I
baby
was
did.
shocked. I was shocked because I knew this woman's life. This was she would smoke meth at midnight so she could stay awake through the night so she wouldn't be accosted. I was shocked, to be honest. And she said the baby was with an uncle in Texas who evidently was able to provide. Number one, I was glad the baby was healthy and safe because
Yeah.
that was a total surprise. One would not have looked at this scenario and expected
Well,
that.
she didn't expect it either in the
She
book.
did not. She
No.
did not. And she's still dealing with substance abuse issues. Uh, and I met her mother. This was so random,
Hmm.
so random. And I happened to be giving out food, and there she was, miles away from where I had met her, and the picture in the book. It was just it blew my mind. But hopefully that child's in good hands and is healthy. I mean, that would be a testament to nature, because this was a tough way to come to this world. So that's an interesting thing, but she's still struggling. She is still struggling, and yeah, so many folk are having a hard time finding their way out of this.
I mean, addiction in the best scenario is so hard to
It's a
beat.
beast.
And then you add in not knowing where your next meal is coming from, your actual physical safety. It's a very hard monster to slay. It's a very hard dragon to slay.
We're seeing young women like her and others, young men and women who are probably second and third generation dealing with the results of the crack epidemic of the 80s
Yeah.
and other social issues, and as things spin out of control. And I do believe, as a result of seeing how many folk are addicted to crack, to coke, to all these things around the city, it makes you wonder, and I'm not a conspiracy guy at all, but the neglect, this benign neglect, it's
Mm,
conspiratorial just in its nature, uh, to turn away without interceding and letting things get to where they are today. I
right.
mean, it comes from neglect and many generations now that
Yeah.
have been affected.
When I was reading the book, what you bring up about this idea of that, she could be the second, third generation of homelessness or having experienced
Mhm.
being unhoused. Is homelessness just a factor of life now for us? Is that something that will not go away? Is it persistent at this point? Or is it a problem that can be solved? Or is it the sort of detritus of a capitalist society? You have people who are going to have a lot, and you're going to have people who have nothing. And many of them end up disposed of and tossed away onto the streets. Is that just part of it now?
What doesn't it appears with the disparity of incomes, and as you said, people that have a lot and people that have very little or nothing, and that gap seems to be widening. I haven't seen really a lot to make me think that we're closing the gap, the income gap, the education gap. I don't worry about my son. He's in a loving home, and we'll do our best to provide what he needs to be successful, whatever that success means, right? But I worry about those children whose parents are struggling, struggling so hard to get a meal for the end of the day. And when I see a Nevaeh, and I exchanged yesterday morning with her dad, say, "Hey, how are you guys? What's going on?" And he says, "Well, we're on such and such a street, and can you bring me some food, bro?" And he's waiting to go to it interview, a job interview today. I'm not seeing the gap closing, and the numbers don't seem to indicate that that gap is closing. So perhaps it is sadly and hopefully not for the duration, but a new normal, I
Mm.
think, in many ways. So that's why it was so important to put out something to make us look so it doesn't become normal.
Right.
So we're shocked. And it's important that we respond.
You said earlier in our conversation, and you say in the book that you grew up with a lot of love and you've done so much with your life. And I wonder how that love was manifested to you growing up and who nurtured that part of you to where you could create something like Trespass.
I can't point to I can point to my grandmother, my Jamaican
Mhm.
grandmother, my other grandmother, I really feel like I had the benefit of a nurturing family, not just one individual out of the family. You
Mhm.
know, my dad, who is an artist as well as a policeman, but it was hard for a Black artist in New York in the 50s to support a family.
Yeah.
So he became a policeman, but he
Wow.
continued to shoot and to paint. And, so I grew up around the arts and with my grandfather and my uncle and my dad and all. And it wasn't a far stretch for me to want to pursue that path. What I did benefit greatly from was their support throughout the ups and downs of being a struggling artist. And that part of life isn't over.
No,
Art is a
no.
constant struggle to produce something worthy of people's attention
Mhm.
and even their commerce. So it's a journey. It's a journey, but I would not have been able to take that journey. I would not have been able to show the love and compassion that I feel for these folk on the street without the love and compassion and support I felt from my family, from my whole family.
And Jennifer,
My
her,
wife.
I mean, her role in the book, your wife's role in the book is pretty amazing because not everyone signs up for that when they partner with another person, that we're going to be in and out of the homeless
You make me laugh.
cabins of
It's
Los
true.
Angeles. Like sometimes like, I didn't sign up for that, but
You
she's
made me
to be
cry.
like,
Yes, it's true. Yeah, I always say my biggest mistakes in my career were when I haven't asked her advice. And she is a spirit unmatched and full of love and tough as nails, but she's ride or die. And was there the night I met Crystal, and it was just amazing. And I literally had to stop her because sometimes I'm out late and doing a thing, and on the street and in the street and all about it. And I'm like, no, you're not coming with me tonight. I want you safe and sound. I need some stability.
yeah, yeah.
But yes, this book and the documentary and all that's forthcoming and
Yes.
all would not have been possible at all without her support.
When does the documentary come out? I know that it's
The
forthcoming soon.
short, the short has been submitted to just two festivals we were interested in, and the Martha's Vineyard African American Film
Oh
Festival.
yeah. Oh
I'm
yeah.
waiting to hear, fingers crossed, as well as one of the African American Hollywood film festivals. And so and the long form, the feature length is being cut as we speak. Music's being composed, and we're using Dedisi, who you mentioned earlier. He had a milestone album in '83, an amazing album that he composed and wrote and put out in '83. That was a real hit in LA. Jazz, deep, deep jazz. We're using parts of that. I licensed that from him. We're using part of that as the sound bed. And I'm really excited because it's not your standard talking heads. It's a poem, it's meditation on homelessness. And that's how we're approaching it. And I'm super excited about it. And my producing partners are excited, Natalie Hill and Salima Keel. And they're just great friends and great partners on this venture.
Again, it's the complexity of the whole narrative that you created. The book, the writing is beautifully crafted and it's very poetic. So I think it's going to really challenge how people view this whole thing that we're trying to address in homelessness because and you said it, You know, when you were writing about Jimmy, you said, and you talk about him so beautiful, like he can't sing, but he plays the guitar and he has a beautiful voice, his very light voice. And you said, you see, Jimmy was tethered to another time, yet retained a certain cool and hipness. His sentences laced with words from his heyday, when life was exciting and filled with promise. And to me, that struck me because, again, he's all of us. We all have those days when we were filled with promise and we were
Mm,
hip and cool, and now he's homeless.
yeah. Yeah, and it was funny, and the photographs in there really captured him. I'm not saying it because I took those photos. I'm saying that because he emoted that.
Yeah.
There was this thing about him and the way he held the guitar, which was out of tune, and he wasn't a great guitar player.
I
It
mean,
was a prop. But the way I was captivated by him,
yeah.
and uh, but he could sing. He had this
Yeah.
really sweet, like a siren, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I imagined him. I mean, we sat there talking for hours, and I had sat there watching him from across the street. I was just sitting on the ground, leaning against a building, watching him for an hour before I approached him and sat down with him. And he was magical. And there was something that just came across, and he talked about his experiences up north and his experiences in Greenwich Village, and with such a strong feeling about it, such a strong
Mhm.
connection to that time so long ago.
Mm.
And those kinds of experiences are what I spoke to when writing the piece about who we see now is not who they've been. So those kinds of interactions with people like Jimmy and Dedisi and Don and all the others, they weren't always like this.
No.
They weren't always like this.
Why the name Trespass? Who's the trespasser?
Wouldn't you like to know? That's I'm at I would I love that title because of that.
Yeah.
And we assume they're the trespasser because one of the first two pictures I took, which aren't, I don't think they're in the book, but there's a gentleman walking by a sign, and I he's a blur. He was clearly homeless, and I shot him, and behind him was like a no trespassing sign.
Mm.
And he was blurry and the sign was clear, which I loved. And I saw that, and as it started to come together, and I told my wife, I said, I'm going to call this trespass. She said, why? Who's trespassing? I said, let's ponder that. Who is trespassing? When I step into the area of their tent, I'm the trespasser. That's their home. Yeah. When they step in front of that 7-Eleven, that store owner thinks they're the trespasser. So it's all depends on where you are in this journey.
And you have the echo of the Lord's Prayer in there.
Oh my goodness, yes. I did not think of that. Backslidden, but yes.
Ah!
Yes, very, very true. Very true. Yeah. Thank you
Powerful title.
for connecting that.
Yeah, it's a powerful
Yeah.
title.
Yeah.
Kim, in this season of the show, I'm talking to people about the legacies they hope to leave behind. And I wonder for you, what you think your legacy is or will be.
That's interesting. You know, as artists, we all want to have, I want that Gordon Parks legacy. My idol since I was a little boy. But
Yeah.
that aside, I want my legacy to be one that represents understanding and true artistic integrity
Mm.
and a mission. I've kind of done a lot of things and commercially, and this is what I consider art as a catalyst for change.
Mm.
And it doesn't mean it's not commercial. I feel fortunate people are resonating with with the art and have the ability to put it on their walls, and what it does is drive conversation.
Yeah.
When I have Nevaeh on the wall, it is a picture of a beautiful little girl.
Yeah.
That opens up the door to talk about this. Um, Gardner is now on a wall of a collector in Chicago. As you come into his home, this is what you see, and he wants to have that conversation. So I want my legacy to just represent art, love, and understanding for all of us.
Mm.
Yeah.
Kim, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and for the book. It's just, I have to show it again. It's a beautiful book, and
Thank you.
it's a powerful tool. So thank
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very proud. It dropped onto Barnes and Noble yesterday. So now Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop.
you everywhere.
And please join me. Please join me on, if you want to drop me a note, come to
Yes,
my website or whatever. I'll leave that to you.
yes. I'll post it. It'll be posted with this.
Thank you,
So
sir.
thank you so
It's a
much.
pleasure. I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. And to those of you who are watching or listening, remember, we all have a voice. We all will leave a legacy. Use yours wisely. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.